Hi, I'm Cailey, a librarian here at Metro Public Library.
And I'm Meg, also a librarian, and welcome to this week's edition of All Booked Up with Cailey and Meg, where each time we give you different book recommendations on a specific theme. Today, Cailey and I are going to be looking at book club themed books. So in addition to our other librarian duties, Cailey and I each run book clubs for the library. Just a small little plug for that if you're interested. So we've done it for a while. So we've had a lot of books we've read and discussed with the people in our groups. So we thought we'd share some of the ones that we think will be good for that. If you want to just read it on your own with your own book club that you run, or even if just a friend that you want to discuss it with. These are maybe some good options.
Yes, and I think over the years, we've found that not all books make great book club books. Not all of them lead to good discussion. So it's good to have a variety of different titles. And one of the other things we'll plug here is that a lot of the books that the library groups use get made into book kits that you can check out right at the library and bring and distribute 12 copies to you and your friends. So for your own personal book club, you can enjoy a lot of these titles that way too.
All right, Cailey, what is your first book club book?
So my first that I'm going to talk about today is called The Song of the Jade Lily by Kirsty Manning. And this one came out in 2018, but my book club just read it within the last year. And I will say, if you're a book club person, it's always good to pick a book a year or two after it came out because it's a lot easier to get your hands on it.
Very true.
So my book group tends to be big fans of historical fiction in particular, but we try to read a little bit of everything. But that said, with historical fiction, it can get a little repetitive sometimes. Especially when we talk about books that take place around World War II. There's a lot of books that are still great books, but can kind of blend together with the common themes. So I am always happy to find a title that sort of stands out, touches on little known aspects of the time period, that kind of thing. And so this book, which does take place during World War II, actually takes place in Shanghai. And this is about Rami and her family who fled Australia. They were Jewish and their family was being persecuted, and they fled to Shanghai to find some sort of safety during the war. So they wind up in the French concession district of Shanghai with a lot of other refugees, as well as some natives to the area. But there's also turmoil happening at this time in Shanghai. There is the war going on around the whole world, of course, but in Shanghai, there's also this sort of fight for dominance over the city, and there's like good areas and bad areas. So Rami finds a best friend in Lee, who is the daughter of Dr. Ho, who is a medicinal man, but he does more non-traditional medicine. And Lee and Rami are the same age and wind up going to the same school and quickly become fast friends. Lee's older brother is also around with the girls, and Rami has a little bit of a crush on him. And they honestly have an okay life here in Shanghai, but with war raging on close to home, things start to change rapidly for them over the course of the war. And they face a lot of challenges that they and their families never imagined having to face, even after all of the things that they've been through. This book also takes place in 2016, where Rami is now an old woman, and her granddaughter, Alexandra, is trying to sort of figure out where she belongs in the world. And part of that is trying to get to the bottom of some of her grandmother's secrets, because her grandmother, Rami, has been very secretive about her life before she had her daughter, Alexandra's mother. And there is a bit of a gray past. And so when Alexandra finds some pictures of her grandmother as a child with this pretty Chinese girl, she is very curious about what her grandmother's hiding. Finds herself in Shanghai herself, trying to figure things out and kind of diving into her family's past and what happened to her grandmother while she was in Shanghai. So this is a topic that no one in my book club really knew anything about, particularly, the strife in Shanghai during this time, and also that many European refugees fled to Shanghai. And so we had a lot of stuff to talk about with that, but it's also just a really great book that has a lot of anticipation of trying to get to the bottom of some of these secrets and seeing what happens to these people and where it takes them and how these different choices have impacted their lives.
Wow. Yeah, that's a chapter of World War II history I know nothing about, never heard of that. Sounds really great. And I like the idea of, combining mystery components with it. So, there's some history in there, but also mystery, what, the true nature of family dynamics over multiple generations. So very, very cool. My next one, a book club type book, would be One Italian Summer by Rebecca Serle. Now, this one came out last year, and I think it has a lot of great talking points to the story. It's a mix of family type story with magical realism. So here it goes. When Katie's mother dies, she is left reeling. Carol wasn't just Katie's mom, but her best friend and the first person she would call in just about any situation. And they had a lot of plans of what they were going to do together, vacations and things like that. And one of the big ones was they were planning this great vacation to the Amalfi Coast. So Katie decides after her mother dies that she still wants to do this. She still wants to go. So one summer, she heads to Italy, and she begins, as soon as she comes to that place, to feel her mother's spirit. And, it's a beautiful location, obviously, the beautiful waters, cliff sides, a delightful residence, and of course, delicious food. She thinks, okay, I'm still going to find a way to enjoy this trip. But then something very crazy happens, Cailey. Carol appears, her mother. And not as Katie remembers her. So for background, Katie is about 30 years old. She starts seeing her mother in the flesh as a 30-year-old, just like her. Suntanned, beautiful, young, vibrant, vivacious. And it's like a person she can talk to. So rather than trying to completely understand why this is happening, Katie just decides to roll with it. She starts talking to her mom, slowly starting to peel back, okay, what's going on here? But along the way, discovering a lot about her mother that she didn't know, even though she considered her mom to be her best friend her whole life. So I think this is a great choice for book clubs for a lot of reasons. It's a fun location to talk about, beautiful setting. I find that books about family often generate a lot of interesting discussion. So it's you could talk a lot about that, grief, loss, and also, that relatable feeling of, maybe seeing your parents one way as a child and then growing up and maybe that changes just because as a process of growing up. So it's a fascinating book in a lot of respects, and one I would highly recommend for your book club.
Definitely. That sounds really interesting too, because I think the idea of, seeing your parent as almost your equal, your same age and everything is kind of startling too. I'm sure that we've all sort of flipped through pictures and been like, they were my age here. So I think that sounds interesting. Yeah. And I think that would make a really great discussion to be able to talk about, your own relationships with family members and stuff. And what would you do in that situation? So my next one is more of a contemporary book, but this is also about 4 or 5 years old, I think. This one is called Ginny Moon by Benjamin Ludwig. And I will preface this by saying it was recommended to me by a coworker, I believe. And it took me like 2 years to convince my book club to read it. After we read it, though, like there were people who said it was their favorite book that they have ever read in book club. So I was like, ooh, high praise. So this book is told entirely from Ginny's perspective. And Ginny is 14 years old and has recently found her forever family after having several years bounced around between foster families. Her forever parents find out that they're having a baby. And this is sort of upending Ginny's world. The baby reminds Ginny of her baby doll she left behind when she was taken from Gloria, her birth mother. Gloria was bad and didn't take good care of Ginny, and Ginny understands that, but she still wants to sort of find her way back to Gloria because she wants to know if they found her baby doll and if she can have her baby doll back. And she knows that this is not allowed, that she's not allowed to find Gloria. She knows that her forever parents wouldn't like it and that bad things could happen because she remembers when bad things happened all the time when she lived with Gloria. But even so, when an opportunity presents itself for her to use the library at school and get on the computer, she finds a way to track down Gloria, bringing all sorts of turmoil into their life. This is, of course, on top of the fact that her forever parents are having a baby and they're struggling to sort of adapt to what that looks like with Ginny and their family too, because Ginny's been their sole child for this time that they've had her, and it's taken them a long time to adapt to Ginny's ways and get her comfortable with them. But now having this baby, they have concerns about Ginny being safe around the baby and, you know, also just how to deal with a lot of her quirks and sort of kind of find their new normal, if you will. And Ginny feels that everything's sort of changed since the baby's come into her life, and she doesn't really like that. And again, she wants to get back to sort of what she knew before, even though she doesn't really want to go back to everything because she knows that there were bad things. It's a complicated thing. But so this book, as you probably have gathered, is one that you're going to have to read very carefully because Ginny is not your typical 14-year-old. She is autistic and has her own sort of unique way of viewing the world. And it's one that as a reader, you kind of have to read between the lines of what Ginny is telling you and what you can figure out is happening, which makes it something that, you know, you almost read slower because she's not the most reliable narrator in that she doesn't understand everything that's going on around her. So the way she's relating things to you as a reader is from this childlike perspective, which, you know, is not always accurate. Right. And this book is really unique, and it's very touching. It's very complicated. It shows like these complex relationships, especially between Ginny and her forever parents, and how, you know, these decisions have changed their lives, but how it's impacting their relationship, all these different things happening. And you also learn about Ginny's history and, you know, how she got to where she is. And a lot of that is not pretty and is very sad, but you get to love and care for Ginny through this book. And, you know, you just kind of hope that things will work out. So this was one that really generated a lot of discussion and was just kind of a fascinating dive into something completely different for us.
Wow, sounds great. Yeah. And it's funny you say at the very end, I was thinking as you were describing Ginny the whole time, just like, wow, I feel for her. You know, you just like just her story. Yeah, I could see how that could be almost an emotional read, you know, just because you want her to, you know, to succeed and everything. And I love that too. And also with book clubs, you know, there's always, you know, when you find a list of questions for a book club discussion, that you always ask about the narrator. You know, can you trust the narrator, or if you think the narrator is influenced by something or someone. So I think that would be a fascinating discussion to have as well. You know, how is Ginny's viewpoint impacting the story that you're reading? So sounds very just good. In my last book club theme book was one that our club did last year. And to your point, Cailey, it's a World War II one called The Paris Library by Janet Skeslien Charles. And this takes place mainly in two places. It takes place in World War II era Paris and 1980s Montana, which when the first time I read this book, that really caught me off guard. I'm like, how is this going to tie in 1980s Montana? So I won't spoil too much of how they are connected, other than to say, starting in Paris, 1939, our main character is young and ambitious Odile Souchet. And she seems to have the perfect life. She's a young adult, and she's got this dream job at a place called the American Library in Paris. And for anyone who doesn't know, this was a real place. Actually, it's still around today, even. And during World War II, it was popular for Americans living in Paris, where a library they could go to find books in English and to also kind of interact with, there were some American employees there who they could contact to see news about what was happening in America and all of that. But Odile gets to work in the news department of that library. And, she meets a lot of quirky, interesting characters who work at the library, patrons who visit the library. Can you tell this is a good library book? As a librarian, maybe I'm a little biased, but however, no. But then, obviously, because it's 1939, obviously with the threat of the Nazis invasion factors into this story. So Odile meets a young, handsome soldier who we later learn more about. It seems idyllic at first, their relationship, but then we discover some more things about him. Won't spoil that. But then to go back to 1983 Montana, all I'll say is there's a young girl, her name is Lily, and there are parallels made between her and Odile. But she's going through a lot. Lily's mom has just recently passed away at the beginning of the story. And kind of like in the Ginny Moon story, Cailey mentioned her new stepmom, is having a baby. So there's a new baby into the picture and kind of how she deals with that. But she does have an interaction with Odile, and you kind of learn more about both of their stories throughout. So I like the mix of these two unique different time and places in 20th century. Obviously a lot was going on, but I loved reading about Paris during this time. It was very fascinating, because it's at a library, there's obviously a mention of a lot of different books. And the book kit that goes with this, that the publishers created, is fantastic for a book club. They have a whole list of French Parisian music you should listen to while reading this book, French recipes. They have a list with every single piece of literature mentioned in this book, which, as I mentioned, is a lot. So there's a lot of cool stuff to talk about with this one.
Yes. And full disclosure, my book club read that as well. And so I can say it is a good one for a book discussion.
Definitely.
Yes. Well, thank you for joining us. Hopefully you check out some of these books, whether as a kit or online through Hoopla Libby or at the library, and you find that they're helpful too for your book club or just for a discussion with a friend. Or if you want to find one of us, we'll chat with you some more about them.
We will. Absolutely. Thank you so much, guys.
We'll see you next time.
Happy reading.